Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Brandon had always been a man of simple habits. He got used to waking up at the same time every day, making his own coffee, listening to the news while getting ready, and going over his schedule for the day. After so many repetitions, each movement seemed memorized, like a familiar melody playing weekly on the same radio station. He'd been living with Kayla for almost 8 years. Although they never officially signed any papers, they lived as if they had been united long before. Brandon paid the bills on time, washed the car every Saturday, and watched the same old movies she loved just to see her happy. He believed this consistency was something solid and essential. He wasn't overly romantic, but he was faithfully present. Kayla, on the other hand, was pure impulsiveness. She often quit jobs when they stopped enchanting her, dyed her hair according to sudden mood swings, and restarted things without fully understanding what came before. Brandon didn't see that as a problem. In fact, he thought they balanced each other out. He offered stability, and she brought movement. On that Tuesday, Kayla told him she would be going out with Sabrina, her closest friend. Brandon was sitting at the kitchen table eating rice, meat, and vegetables he had prepared himself. She appeared in the bedroom doorway wearing a tight red dress and high heels. He glanced up briefly and smiled slightly. "Where are you going dressed up like that?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Kayla laughed and replied it was just dinner with her coworker. She gave him a kiss on the forehead, grabbed her purse, and hurried out, as she always did. Brandon stayed there finishing his meal without rushing. He washed the dishes, cleaned the counter, and decided to go to a small restaurant near his workplace where he usually ordered an apple pie slice with coffee. It was a familiar place where the waiter already knew his order before he even sat down. While he waited, a familiar figure passed by him. It was Kyle, an old school friend. They greeted quickly and sat together to chat. Kyle asked how things were going, and Brandon summarized briefly. He talked about work, the calm life with Kayla, mentioned that she had gone out with Sabrina that night. That's when Kyle stopped fidgeting with the napkin and stared at Brandon with a mix of shock and confusion. "But Sabrina is in London. She started a new project there. I spoke with her yesterday." Brandon felt his stomach churn. He smiled superficially, but internally, a distant alarm began ringing, too faint to disturb greatly, yet strong enough to be noticed. Pretending interest in another subject, he changed the topic, thanked him for the company, and left earlier than usual. He got into his car and stayed there for a while, engine running, headlights on, but without hurry to leave. That piece of information spun in his mind like something out of place. Sabrina was overseas. And Kayla had said she was going out to dinner with her. Something was wrong. Brandon tried thinking of other explanations. Maybe she made a mistake. Or maybe there was another Sabrina. But clearly, he only knew one person named Sabrina close to Kayla, precisely the one she had spoken of. The red dress, the high heels, the rush when leaving, the kiss on the forehead, everything seemed normal until it no longer did. Later, around 11 p.m., the front door opened. Kayla walked in lightly, holding her shoes in her hands. Brandon was on the couch with the TV on some channel, eyes fixed but distant. She smiled as if returning from any ordinary night. She dropped her bag onto the console table, threw her shoes into a corner, and said the food at the restaurant had been terrible, that Sabrina was excited about a new personal project, and they lost track of time talking about their paths. As she spoke, she moved around the house as if nothing had happened, as if recounting something trivial. Brandon simply watched her and murmured, There was no anger in his voice, nor coldness. It was surgical neutrality, as if testing how far she could keep up that lie. Kayla, possibly confident because of his apparent calmness, continued narrating details, mentioning traffic on the way back, complaining about the excessive heat in the restaurant, and even saying Sabrina sent greetings. He simply nodded, picked up the remote control, and turned up the volume on the TV. She remained there for a few minutes, glancing at him sideways, perhaps waiting for some question, comment, any reaction. But Brandon remained silent, firm like someone watching a film already known. Inside, he felt the weight of every false word she had spoken. But externally, he maintained the composure of someone about to write a new story, and she couldn't imagine she wouldn't be the main character anymore. That night, when she went to sleep, he remained in the living room staring at the ceiling. He already knew what needed to be done. Now, it was just a matter of planning. The next morning, Brandon woke up and lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, while his mind pieced together what seemed scattered the previous night. He listened to Kayla moving around in the next room, humming softly while preparing for work, as if the world were perfectly in order. He got up, put on his jeans, ran his hand through his hair, and headed out for yet another day, maintaining a peaceful expression. Still, inside, calmness transformed into strategy. That suspicion lodged in his chest wouldn't allow him rest again until the truth stood directly before him, naked and unquestionable. The following morning, he waited for the right moment. Kayla had left her phone charging in the kitchen, as she always did. Brandon, who worked in refrigeration technology, was skilled with systems and apps. While the phone charged, without her noticing, he installed a monitoring program. Quick, discreet, and efficient. Nothing overly invasive, just enough to know where she was when she claimed to be somewhere else. He finished his coffee, kissed her cheek, wished her a good day, and left as he always did. In the days that followed, he observed. He mentally noted times, places, and routes. When Kayla claimed she'd stay late due to accumulated reports, he checked in real time and confirmed she really was at the office. It was on a Friday that everything became clear. Kayla said she had an important meeting in the late afternoon and might meet up with some coworkers afterward. Brandon responded naturally. He was calm, cold, like someone who already knows the ending of the story but decides to follow it until the last chapter. So, he waited a few minutes and opened the app. He saw the real-time movement and followed carefully. The icon representing her phone crossed residential neighborhoods, far from commercial areas. It stopped on a quiet street with low gates and little activity. Brandon parked a bit away and continued on foot. He recognized Kayla's silhouette stepping out of the vehicle alongside a man. They both walked in. She was laughing. There was lightness in her gaze he hadn't seen at home in a long time. Brandon paused on the opposite side of the street, took out his phone, and took a few photos. The images weren't shocking, but for him, they were sufficient. He stayed there for several minutes, observing. She looked fine, happy, just with someone else. And everything he had built over nearly 10 years, she discarded casually somewhere in town. He took a deep breath and returned to his car. Turned on the engine and kept looking at the rearview mirror for a long time. He didn't cry. He simply thought, planned. He had just seen the truth, and the truth was simple: she chose to lie. At home, he opened his laptop and began preparing his departure. First, he searched for apartments in more distant and discreet neighborhoods. He needed something small and functional, just enough for him and the essentials. He selected 2 properties and scheduled visits for the next day. Then, he initiated small transfers from the joint account to an individual account she didn't know about. Nothing abrupt, minimal amounts that would go unnoticed by someone who doesn't regularly check statements. Next, he gathered important documents, passport, certificates, old records. He placed everything in a folder. He sifted through boxes of paper, throwing away what no longer mattered. It was like cleaning a field before rebuilding. He was shedding layers of the life he had built with her. And strangely, he did it peacefully. That night, Kayla arrived late. She said the meeting dragged on too long. She complained about the boss, mentioned a new employee who talked too much. Brandon smiled, listened attentively, asked questions to avoid raising suspicions. She went to sleep shortly after. He stayed awake, looking at the ceiling, reflecting on the next step. This wasn't about jealousy or resentments anymore. It was about respect, the respect for himself, not accepting crumbs disguised as affection. He wanted to leave without yelling, arguments, or an audience. In the following days, he finalized the details. He visited the properties and chose the second one, small, airy, with a parking spot and close to the subway. He paid 2 months up front. He gradually removed his belongings, always during moments when Kayla wasn't home: photos, clothes, books, documents, the essentials. He cancelled the lease contract for the house they lived in since it was under his name. Notice was given with a 1-month notice period. The landlord simply thanked him. Everything fit together like previously planned pieces. With each move, Brandon felt lighter. There was no room for doubt anymore. He had confirmed and accepted. All that remained was executing it with the same precision he used when fixing equipment at work, carefully dismantling, removing worn parts, replacing what no longer worked, and restarting with something functional. Only this time, the part that no longer worked was his life with Kayla. On the scheduled morning, Brandon woke up earlier than usual. He calmly got out of bed, put on the pants folded over the chair, and went to the kitchen to prepare a quick coffee. Kayla was still sleeping deeply, turned to the side, as if life continued unchanged. But for Brandon, that day was already different. The plan was complete. Everything he needed to do, he had already done. The new apartment was rented. The essential items were already stored in his new space. The accounts were organized, and the house lease cancelled with a set moving date in 2 weeks. He finished his coffee and took a deep breath. He picked up the envelope he had prepared the previous night and placed it on the kitchen table. Inside were printed photos of the affair, the lease termination notice, the house key, and the ring he wore daily out of consideration for Kayla. He felt the weight of everything but didn't hesitate. The decision was no longer an impulse. It was a path carefully traced step by step. Since they never formalized the relationship legally, it avoided a more complicated separation. Since they weren't legally married, there was no need for a formal divorce, lawyers, or complicated agreements, just a silent and discreet end, where decisions were made without involving legal procedures. Shortly after, he packed only a backpack with the necessary clothes and left through the door with the calmness of someone who had finally chosen himself after years of trying to maintain a relationship based on trust that no longer existed. As he drove toward the new apartment, his mind was clear. No desire to look back, no anxiety about what came next. What needed to be done was already done. The silence in the car seemed to reflect relief at finally closing a chapter. When he parked and climbed to his new home, he locked the door, dropped the backpack on the floor, and sat down. He felt the world around him didn't require explanations, justifications, promises, or commitments. This was his alone, exclusively his. Hours later, Kayla woke up alone. She stretched out her arms searching for Brandon but found only the cold sheet. She got up imagining he was already in the kitchen or perhaps had gone out to buy something. She slowly walked through the house still drowsy but felt a strange uneasiness in the air. Everything seemed in order, but the silence was different. She called Brandon twice. No response. She went to the bedroom and stopped in front of the closet. Half the clothes were gone. She rushed to the kitchen and found the envelope on the table. She opened it with trembling hands and faced each item as if stones fell one by one onto her chest. She read the lease termination notice. She saw the photos taken from afar showing her with the other man entering that house. At the end, she saw the ring, simple, without words, yet more definitive than any scream or argument. She sat at the table and remained there for several minutes. She tried calling Brandon, but the call went straight to voicemail. She sent messages, wrote long texts, then deleted them. She called 3 more times. Nothing. She got up and wandered around the house as if walking through a minefield. She felt the pain would explode at any moment. She called her lover, voice trembling, saying Brandon had discovered everything and left. She begged for help. The man hesitated, mumbled apologies, said he was involved with other commitments and that kind of involvement wasn't what they agreed on. The call was short. On the other end, he hung up without even asking if she was okay. Kayla sat on the living room floor for a while. The next day, she tried calling a coworker she had gone out for drinks with once or twice. She explained the situation and asked for a place to stay for a few days. The coworker said the house was full, it was a complicated moment, and hoped everything would get resolved. Another closed door. With her mind racing, she started looking for a place to live. Her parents lived in another state, and she had never nurtured close ties with her family. Thus, the next day, she started looking for cheap small apartments and found one available, although in poor condition. Even so, it fit her budget. A week later, she moved, carrying whatever she could in her car. Clothes thrown into bags, personal items piled into makeshift boxes. The new apartment was 3 blocks from work, in an old building with a moldy smell and dim lighting in the hallways. She climbed the stairs carrying everything alone. No one was waiting for her, not to help, not to ask how she was doing. When she opened the door to her new space, she looked at the dirty walls and stained floors. She threw the bags into the corner and sat on the floor surrounded by boxes and silence. She stared at the ceiling, unable to understand how her life changed so drastically so quickly. She grabbed her phone and looked at the messages she had sent to Brandon, all unanswered. She considered writing another, but gave up. In the following days, Kayla tried continuing life, but every step felt heavy. The restaurant where she used to eat with Brandon now seemed too far. Frozen meals in the microwave became her new dinners. At work, she kept appearances, but she knew people were watching. The news of her breakup spread silently, like everything related to that ending. There was no room for justifications anymore. The apartment she now lived in made clear the contrast between what she had and what she lost. And despite not hearing a single word from Brandon, she understood every detail of his choice. In his new apartment, Brandon felt the weight on his shoulders finally dissolving. It wasn't luxurious or large, but it was entirely his. A space where every corner brought silence and dignity. There, he could breathe. He ensured everything was simple and functional: a new bed, a small stove, a foldable table. No photographs hanging on the walls, no remnants of the past. His phone, now free from persistent calls or message filled with apologies, rested far from reach. The first nights were strange, but not sad. He slept early, woke up with plenty of time, and resumed life with steady steps. He started walking more, cooking for himself, reading books he had neglected. For the first time in years, he didn't have to measure his words or worry about appearances. His absence had already said everything. In a short time, Brandon started smiling peacefully again. At work, he maintained his usual pace, delivered results, and chatted with colleagues as if life had entered a new chapter. Meanwhile, Kayla tried, little by little, to reorganize her routine. Living with what remained. The new apartment was a shadow of the comfort she once had. Sometimes she passed by places frequented with Brandon. During those moments, remorse cut deeper. She sent spaced messages, as someone seeking a crack in that silence. She said she missed him, that she got lost in the rush of life, that she acted without thinking. But he remained silent, firm. There was no room left for reconciliation. Slowly, she realized that some choices come with too high a price and that not every attempt at repair finds a response. On an ordinary Saturday, Brandon received a visit from a newly arrived neighbor needing help installing a water heater. He spent the afternoon adjusting connections and testing wiring. When he finished, the neighbor offered a beer, and they talked for hours. It was the first time in a long while that Brandon shared a bit of his story without resentment, without exaggerated details. He simply said that starting over can be difficult, but sometimes it's the only way for someone truly wanting to live. When he returned to the apartment, he looked around and felt something he hadn't felt in years: lightness. The pain had passed. The love had ended. But self-respect remained. And that was what saved him. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.